Imagine this for a second. If China and Japan actually went to war tomorrow, who would show up? Not just politically. I mean, who really steps in when things get serious? Who sends support, who stays silent, and who quietly takes advantage of the chaos? Because modern war isn't just about missiles, ships, or how big your army is, it's about something way more uncomfortable to think about: whether anyone is actually willing to stand next to you when it counts. And here's the twist: Japan wouldn't be alone. Behind it stands the United States and a decades-old alliance system. So what about China? Does it have real allies? Or just partners with limits? And if things escalate, could this pull in Russia, India, and North Korea? Maybe even reshape the entire Asia-Pacific overnight? Today, we're breaking it all down. Who would fight? Who would hesitate? And who might change the game without firing a single shot? Let's start with a harsh reality for Beijing. Behind Japan lies an entire alliance system centered on the United States. That isn't speculation, it's written into history and law. Back in 1951, the US and Japan signed a security treaty. That treaty basically says, the US guarantees Japan's security, and in return, Japan provides bases for US forces. Fast forward to today, and there are around 55,000 US troops stationed in Japan, spread across multiple bases. So let's be clear. A war with Japan, in many ways, is a war with the United States that may involve the UK, France, Germany, Australia, and a long list that is not easy to exhaust. That's not fear-mongering. That's just reality. Now, does that mean China has no friends? China does have friends, though very few will come to its rescue. First up, and probably the most important, Russia. A lot of people casually describe China and Russia as back-to-back partners, or say they have a comprehensive strategic partnership. That's true, but it's also a bit shallow if you don't look deeper. Here's a key detail: China and Russia do not have a formal military alliance treaty. That matters a lot. It means that legally, Russia is not obligated to send troops if China goes to war. But here's the thing: no legal obligation doesn't mean no support. You have to look at Russia's current situation. Since the conflict in Ukraine started in 2022, Russia has been heavily isolated by the West. NATO has expanded closer to its borders. Sanctions keep piling up. Energy exports to Europe have been cut back. In that context, China has become one of Russia's most important strategic partners globally. Russia cannot afford to lose China. So what would Russia do if China and Japan went to war? Most likely, it wouldn't send troops directly. However, it would help China in other ways. First, at the United Nations Security Council, Russia would almost certainly veto any resolutions that go against China. Second, it could apply military pressure on Japan from the north. Remember, Russia and Japan still have unresolved territorial disputes over the Kuril Islands. They never even signed a formal peace treaty after World War II. Russia has significant military forces in its Far East. If it starts conducting military exercises near those disputed islands, Japan would have to divert attention and troops to its northern front. That alone is a huge strategic distraction. Third, and maybe most importantly, Russia can provide energy and military-related supplies. It's one of the world's largest energy exporters. In wartime, oil and gas supplies are critical. Even if Russia's military tech isn't as advanced in some areas, it still has strengths, especially in engines and air defense systems. So overall, Russia is that kind of friend who might not jump into the fight directly, but will guard your flank, keep your supply lines running, and make sure no one sneaks up behind you. And in modern warfare, logistics and strategic depth can be more valuable than extra divisions. Next, let's talk about Pakistan. China and Pakistan have one of those rare relationships in international politics that goes way beyond convenience. People often call Pakistan Iron Brother, and that's not just a slogan. This relationship has been built over decades of trust and cooperation. Historically, China supported Pakistan during its wars with India. And Pakistan consistently supported China on the international stage, including backing China's seat in the United Nations. Their military cooperation is deep. A good example is the joint development of fighter jets. Now, would Pakistan send troops if China and Japan went to war? Probably not. And the reason is simple: geography. Pakistan is far from East Asia, and its military focus is mainly on India. It can't project power into the Western Pacific. But what Pakistan can do is still very important. First, it can provide strategic support in the Indian Ocean. Ports like Gwadar could become critical logistical hubs, helping China avoid relying entirely on choke points like the Strait of Malacca. Second, Pakistan can tie down India. If China is at war with Japan, India might see an opportunity to create trouble along the China-India border. But if Pakistan starts applying pressure on India's western front, India will be forced to split its attention. That's the essence of strategic coordination. You don't need to throw punches if you can stop someone else from punching you in the back. Pakistan might not fight directly, but it helps make sure no one else interferes. Now let's talk about a country people often overlook: North Korea. China and North Korea actually have a formal treaty signed in 1961. And this one is serious. It includes a clause that says if one side is attacked, the other must provide military assistance. That's rare. China doesn't have many treaties like that. Of course, reality is always more complicated than treaties. Relations have had ups and downs. But one thing hasn't changed: the strategic value of the Korean Peninsula. If China and Japan went to war, North Korea could play a critical role just by existing. It has a large number of ballistic missiles capable of reaching all of Japan. Even without firing a single one, the threat forces Japan to think twice. Japan can't just throw everything into a war with China and ignore the Korean Peninsula. It would always need to keep forces ready in case something happens there. That's what's called strategic deterrence. Sometimes, just being on the board changes the whole game. Now, let's shift to countries that would likely stay neutral. Most Southeast Asian nations fall into this category: countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Myanmar. Why neutral? Because they don't want to offend either side. They have economic ties with China, as well as security and strategic interests linked to the US and its allies. So the safest move is to stay out. But neutrality isn't all the same. Some countries would be strictly neutral, focusing only on themselves. Others might lean quietly. For example, countries like Cambodia and Laos have close economic ties with China. They probably wouldn't send troops, but they might support China diplomatically or allow logistical access. Thailand is interesting. It's technically a US treaty ally, but it also has strong economic ties with China. In a conflict, it would likely try to stay balanced, not fully siding with either. Vietnam is a special case. It has disputes with China, especially in the South China Sea, but it also doesn't want a region dominated entirely by the US and Japan. So Vietnam would likely stay neutral but with mixed feelings. Now, what about India? Many people assume India would side with Japan. After all, India has tensions with China and has been getting closer to Japan and the US. But that view oversimplifies India. India has a long tradition of strategic independence. It was one of the founders of the non-aligned movement. Historically, it's been very good at maintaining relationships with multiple sides without fully committing. During the Cold War, India worked with both the US and the Soviet Union. So if China and Japan went to war, India's most likely move is to sit back and watch. And maybe benefit. Of course, there's always the possibility of border tensions. But remember Pakistan. If Pakistan applies pressure, India's attention shifts immediately. That's its strategic constraint. Now here's the key point that ties everything together. A lot of people still think about war in World War II terms. Who has more soldiers? Who has more allies? But modern war doesn't work like that anymore. In the age of nuclear weapons, a full-scale war between major powers wouldn't drag on for years. It would likely be intense, fast, and decisive. And in that kind of conflict, what matters most is not how many friends you have. It's how strong your system is. Industrial capacity. Supply chains. Technology. Strike capability. Resilience. China has one of the most complete industrial systems in the world. It has led global shipbuilding for over a decade. It has advanced missile systems capable of threatening major naval assets. These are capabilities built internally. And history matters here, too. Back in 1950, during the Korean War, China faced a US-led coalition without air or naval superiority, and with extremely limited logistics. And still, it managed to push back the forces. At that time, external help was limited and conditional. What carried the situation wasn't the Allies. It was internal resolve. So yes, having friends matters. But a country's ultimate confidence cannot depend on the assumption that others will show up. Now, let's shift gears to another topic that connects deeply to all of this: Okinawa, or historically, the Ryukyu Kingdom. Today, most people think of Okinawa as just part of Japan. But if you rewind about 150 years, that wasn't the case at all. Back then, it was an independent kingdom called Ryukyu. Geographically, it's a chain of islands stretching from Japan's Kyushu down toward Taiwan. Historically, Ryukyu had its own king, culture, and language. It was not the same as Japan. Starting in the 14th century, Ryukyu established a tributary relationship with China. For about 500 years, its kings were officially recognized by Chinese emperors. That wasn't colonial control. It was more of a cultural and trade relationship. Ryukyu benefited massively from it, becoming a key hub in regional trade. That was its golden age. Then things changed. In 1609, Japan's Satsuma domain invaded Ryukyu. But instead of fully annexing it, they adopted a more subtle approach. They forced Ryukyu to become a vassal, while still maintaining its tributary relationship with China. Why? Because Japan wanted access to trade with China, which it couldn't do directly at the time. So Ryukyu became a kind of middleman, while Japan extracted benefits behind the scenes. This dual status lasted for over 250 years. Then, in 1879, Japan fully annexed Ryukyu, abolished its monarchy, and turned it into Okinawa Prefecture. Fast forward to the end of World War II. The Cairo Declaration and the Potsdam Proclamation clearly stated that Japan would be stripped of territories acquired through force. That should have included Ryukyu. But things got complicated. In 1951, the San Francisco Treaty placed Okinawa under U.S. administration. Not sovereignty, just administration. Then, in 1971, the U.S. returned administrative control to Japan. But here's the controversial part. The U.S. transferred control, not ownership. And China wasn't even part of that treaty process. So from a strict legal perspective, the sovereignty question remains debated. Meanwhile, Okinawa today hosts a disproportionate share of U.S. military bases in Japan. Despite being a small part of Japan's land, it carries most of the burden. It has led to decades of local protests. Many Okinawans feel marginalized, both economically and politically. There's also a distinct cultural identity. Some people there still see themselves as Okinawan or Ryukyuan first, not purely Japanese. So when the issue of Okinawa's status comes up, it touches on law, history, identity, and strategy all at once. And strategically, it matters a lot. Because Okinawa sits right in the middle of the so-called First Island Chain, a key line in U.S. military strategy in the Pacific. If that line weakens, the regional balance shifts. So when people talk about Okinawa, they're not just talking about history. They're talking about the present and the future. And that's why it remains such a sensitive issue. Alright, that's a lot to take in. But if you step back, the big picture becomes clearer. Modern conflicts aren't just about two countries fighting. They're about networks, alliances, geography, history, and systems. And while friends matter, what matters more is how strong you are on your own. Because at the end of the day, no one else can fight your war for you. And that's the reality behind all of this.